The stars burned cold in the void as the massive ships moved through space like hungry wolves. Each vessel was the size of a small city, covered in dark metal that seemed to swallow light itself. These were the ships of the Cathera Dominion, and they had been unstoppable for 3 long years. Commander Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship. His green scales caught the light from the control panels as he watched another world die below them. The planet Altair. Prime had been beautiful once, with blue oceans and white clouds. Now orange fire spread across its surface like a disease. The commander's yellow eyes showed no emotion as cities turned to ash. This was the 43rd world his fleet had destroyed. He had stopped counting the lives lost somewhere around world. Number 20. Numbers meant nothing when you dealt in the destruction of entire civilizations. Status report, Vextar said, his voice echoing in the vast bridge chamber. His words came out as harsh clicks and growls, the natural language of his reptilian species. Subcommander Krillana approached, her smaller frame hunched in respect. The planetary defenses have fallen completely, Commander. Their orbital stations were destroyed in the first wave. Ground resistance ended 2 hours ago. Survivors, approximately 12 million, have fled in transport ships. They are heading toward the core systems, as expected. Vextar nodded slowly. This was always how it went. First came the shock of the attack. Then the desperate fight that lasted only hours against his superior forces. Finally, the survivors would run, carrying stories of terror to spread fear among other worlds. The Cathera Dominion had perfected this strategy over centuries of conquest. Fear was a weapon sharper than any blade. Let some live to tell the tale, and the next world would surrender without a fight. It saved time and resources. One of their military fleet, 37 ships, engaged us in Sector 4, all destroyed. No damage to our forces. Another easy victory. Vextar had expected nothing less. The Altairians had been a proud species, masters of stellar engineering and quantum mechanics. Their cities had been marvels of crystal and light. None of that mattered against the Dominion's war machine. The commander walked to the main viewing screen, his clawed feet clicking on the metal floor. Through the transparent barrier, he could see dozens of his ships in perfect formation. Each one bristled with weapons that could crack planets. Their shields glowed with deadly energy. The World Breaker itself was the crown jewel of the fleet. Nearly 50 kilometers long, it carried enough firepower to sterilize an entire star system. Its engines could push it faster than light itself. Its armor could withstand the explosion of a sun. For 3 years, no enemy had even managed to scratch its hull. "Sir, we have incoming transmission from the High Command," reported the communications officer. "Put it through." The holographic image of Supreme Leader Mordok appeared in the center of the bridge. The ancient Kithra scales had faded to gray with age, but his eyes still burned with ambition. Scars covered his face from battles fought in his youth when the Dominion was still building its empire. Commander Vextar, the Supreme Leader's voice carried across space. "I trust the Altairian campaign proceeded as planned." "Yes, Supreme Leader. The world burns as we speak. Their fleet is destroyed. Survivors are in full retreat." "Excellent. You have cleared the path to the next phase of our expansion." Mordekai's image flickered as the transmission adjusted. "Intelligence has located our next target, a cluster of systems in the Outer Rim, recently colonized by a species calling themselves humans." Vextar had heard whispers of these humans in intercepted communications. Another young species, barely out of their home system. They had built a few colonies, nothing more. Typical primitives who thought they could claim space that belonged to stronger races. "What do we know of their military capabilities?" Vextar asked. "Minimal, perhaps 50 ships total, mostly converted cargo vessels. Their technology appears to be several centuries behind our own. Our analysts predict total victory within days of first contact." The commander almost smiled. It would be refreshing to face such weak opposition after dealing with the more advanced Altairians. Sometimes he missed the early days of his career, when battles were so one-sided they barely qualified as fights. "When do we proceed?" "Immediately. The humans have established colonies along our planned expansion route. Remove them, and the entire Outer Rim falls under our control. After that, the galaxy's core systems will have no choice but to negotiate. The transmission ended, leaving Vextar alone with his thoughts. He walked back to his command chair, a throne-like seat that placed him above his officers. From here, he had directed the conquest of 17 star systems. Each victory had been easier than the last. The Kithara Dominion had started as a small empire on the edge of known space. Their home world was harsh and unforgiving, producing a species that valued strength above all else. When they developed faster than light travel, they immediately began taking what they wanted from weaker neighbors. That was 200 years ago. Now, the Dominion controlled over 100 worlds. Their fleets numbered in the thousands of ships. Their armies had never known defeat. The galaxy's older civilizations had learned to avoid them, retreating to heavily defended core systems rather than risk open war. But the frontier territories had no such protection. Young species like the humans were left to fend for themselves. Most chose to surrender without fighting. Those who resisted were crushed so completely that they served as warnings to others. Vextar activated his personal communicator. Navigation, set course for the human colonies. Maximum speed. The Worldbreaker's engines roared to life, pushing the massive ship toward hyperspace. Around it, the rest of the fleet fell into formation. 312 ships of various sizes and roles, all built for one purpose: conquest. As the stars stretched into lines and space folded around them, Vextar thought about the humans. He wondered if they would try to fight or simply surrender when faced with the Dominion's might. Either way, their fate was already sealed. The commander had read reports about human behavior from long-range scouts. They seemed to be curious creatures, always exploring and building new settlements. They appeared to value individual freedom over collective strength. Such attitudes usually made for weak opponents. Still, something about the humans intrigued him. Their ships were crude but showed innovative design choices. Their colonies were small but well defended for their technology level. They seemed to adapt quickly to new situations. Not that it would matter. Innovation meant nothing against overwhelming force. The Dominion had faced creative enemies before. The Zinthari had been master strategists. The Velta had possessed incredible technology. The Altarians had been brilliant engineers. All of them were now extinct or enslaved. The human colonies would burn just like all the others. Their people would flee or die. Their civilization would become another footnote in the Dominion's history of conquest. This was the natural order of the galaxy. The strong took from the weak, and the Kithara were the strongest of all. As the fleet traveled through hyperspace toward human territory, Vextar began planning the attack. It would be swift and brutal, designed to break human resistance before it could organize. The pattern had worked perfectly for 3 years. He had no reason to believe it would fail now. The morning alarm bells rang across New Haven Colony as Jake Morrison finished his coffee in the observation deck. He watched the sunrise paint the orbital shipyards in golden light, thinking it was going to be another quiet day of ship construction. The veteran captain had seen enough action during the frontier wars to appreciate peaceful mornings. Jake was 45 years old, with gray starting to show in his brown hair. His weathered face told the story of 23 years in space, fighting pirates and exploring unknown systems. Now he supervised the construction of Earth's growing fleet, building ships that he hoped would never see real combat. The priority alert that came through at 8:47 changed everything. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan ran into the observation deck, her face pale with worry. She was young, maybe 25, with red hair tied back in a regulation ponytail. Kate had been the colony's communications officer for 2 years, and Jake had never seen her look so frightened. "Captain Morrison, you need to see this immediately," she said, holding out a data pad. Jake took the device and read the emergency transmission. The words made his blood run cold. The message was from the Altarian refugee fleet, survivors of a massive attack by an alien force calling itself the Kithara Dominion. "How many ships are we talking about?" Jake asked. "Over 300, sir, each one larger than anything in our fleet. The Altarians say their entire defense force was destroyed in less than 6 hours. Jake set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. The Altarians had been one of the most advanced civilizations in known space. Their ships were faster and better armed than human vessels. If they couldn't stand against this Dominion, what hope did humanity have? Get me a direct line to Earth Command, he ordered Priority Alpha. Within minutes, Jake found himself on a secure channel with Admiral Lisa Brooks. The Admiral was younger than Jake, only 38, but she had earned her position through brilliant tactical thinking and natural leadership. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her blue eyes showed the stress of command. Captain Morrison, I assume you've seen the Altarian reports, she said without introduction. Yes, ma'am. The numbers are terrifying. 300 ships, each one capable of destroying planets. How much time do we have? Our best estimates put them 6 months away from the nearest human colony. Maybe less if they push their engines hard. Jake felt sick to his stomach. 6 months to prepare for a war they couldn't possibly win. Earth's entire military consisted of 47 ships, most of them converted civilian vessels with basic weapons. Against the Dominion's armada, they would last about as long as paper in a fire. What are our options? He asked. Admiral Brooks was quiet for a long moment. I'm calling an emergency meeting of the Defense Council. Every ship captain, every military leader, every scientist who might have ideas. We meet on Earth in 72 hours. The transmission ended, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts. He walked to the window and looked out at the shipyard where workers were assembling humanity's newest destroyer. The ship looked so small and fragile compared to the monsters described in the Altarian reports. Over the next 3 days, Jake traveled back to Earth for the most important meeting in human history. The council chamber was packed with every military officer of significant rank, along with scientists, engineers, and government leaders. The mood was grim as Admiral Brooks presented the intelligence data. The Cathara Dominion has conquered 17 star systems in 3 years, she began, her voice steady despite the terrible news. They use overwhelming force to crush resistance, then let survivors spread fear to other worlds. It's psychological warfare on a massive scale. The holographic display showed images from the Altarian survivors, massive ships with dark holes and glowing weapons, cities burning from orbit, entire fleets destroyed in minutes. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours, continued the Admiral. Their shields can absorb direct hits from nuclear weapons. Their armor is stronger than anything we can produce. Their ships are faster, larger, and more heavily armed than our best vessels. Captain Steve Mitchell, a veteran of the Outer Rim patrols, raised his hand. What about evacuation? Can we move? Our colony's 2 safer systems. Where would be safe? Admiral Brooks replied. The Dominion is expanding in all directions. Running just delays the inevitable. The room fell silent as the reality sank in. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Humanity was facing extinction, and their enemies had the power to deliver it. Then Dr. Sarah Kim, the head of Advanced Weapons Research, stood up. She was a small woman with black hair and thick glasses, but her mind was one of the sharpest in human space. I have a proposal, she said quietly. It's dangerous, untested, and probably suicidal, but it might be our only chance. All eyes turned to her as she activated her own holographic display. Complex equations and technical diagrams filled the air above the conference table. For the past 5 years, my team has been working on theoretical gravitational manipulation. We've discovered a way to create localized gravity fields that can tear matter apart at the atomic level. Admiral Brooks leaned forward. A weapon, potentially. Yes, but the power requirements are enormous. It would take our largest reactor to fire at once, and the gravitational backlash would probably destroy the ship carrying it. The implications were clear. It was a suicide weapon, one that might not even work. How much damage could it do? Asked Captain Morrison. If it works as our models predict, it could destroy a ship the size of a city, maybe larger. The room erupted in discussion. Some officers called it crazy. Others said it was their only hope. Admiral Brooks raised her hand for silence. Dr. Kim, how long would it take to build this weapon? 6 months, working around the clock. Maybe 5 if we strip resources from other projects. And you'd need a volunteer crew to carry it. Someone would have to get close enough to use it. The weapon has limited range. Admiral Brooks looked around the room at the faces of Earth's military leaders. She saw fear. Yes, but also determination. These were people who had chosen to serve humanity, knowing it might cost them their lives. "Here's what we're going to do," she said finally. "Dr. Kim gets whatever resources she needs to build this weapon. Every available ship gets upgraded with the best equipment we can produce. We evacuate the outer colonies and prepare defensive positions at our strongest worlds. And if the weapon doesn't work," asked Captain Mitchell, "then we fight anyway," Brooks replied. "With everything we have, until the last ship is destroyed. We're not going to surrender to these monsters." Over the following weeks, human space became a hive of activity. Shipyards worked day and night to upgrade the fleet. Scientists pushed the boundaries of human technology, trying to close the gap with their alien enemies. Military leaders developed strategies for fighting a superior force. The Weapon Project, codenamed Gravitational Lance, consumed vast resources. Dr. Kim's team worked without rest, turning theoretical science into deadly reality. The prototype would be mounted on a single ship, crewed by volunteers who knew they wouldn't survive the mission. Captain Ben Carter was the first to volunteer for the suicide mission. He was 32 years old, unmarried, with no family to mourn him. His cargo ship, the Defiant, was selected for conversion because its large hull could handle the massive weapon system. As the months passed, reports continued to arrive from refugee ships. The Dominion was moving steadily toward human space, destroying everything in their path. Each system that fell brought them closer to Earth. The gravitational weapon was completed with just weeks to spare. It looked nothing like traditional human weapons, more like a massive scientific instrument than an engine of war. Dr. Kim conducted the final tests herself, pushing the device to its limits. "It will work," she told Admiral Brooks. "The gravitational field is stable. The targeting system is precise. But the ship firing it will be torn apart by the backlash." "Captain Carter understands the risks," Brooks replied. "He's chosen his crew from volunteers. Good people, all of them." As the Defiant prepared for its mission, the rest of the human fleet took positions throughout the outer systems. They would wait for the Dominion to reveal itself, then strike. With everything they had, Admiral Brooks stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Liberty, watching the stars and waiting for war. She thought about her daughter back on Earth, sleeping safely in her bed. The little girl didn't know that her mother was about to lead humanity into the most desperate battle in their history. The waiting was almost over. Soon the galaxy would learn what happened when someone pushed humanity too far. The Kepler 442 system looked empty when the Dominion scout ships arrived. Their sensors swept across the 3 planets, finding nothing but abandoned mining stations and silent communication relays. The human colonies that intelligence reports had described were gone, leaving only empty buildings and cold machinery. Commander Vextar studied the readings from his command chair aboard the Worldbreaker. The massive flagship hung in space like a dark moon, surrounded by the rest of his fleet. 312 ships spread out in perfect formation, their weapons powered and ready for battle. "Report," he ordered his tactical officer. "All planets show signs of recent evacuation. Commander, the humans appear to have fled approximately 2 weeks ago. No military vessels detected in the system." Vextar's yellow eyes narrowed with disappointment. He had hoped the humans might provide more entertainment than the usual conquest. Instead, they seemed to be following the same predictable pattern as every other species the Dominion had encountered. "Any signs of defensive preparations?" "Negative, sir. The orbital platforms have been abandoned. Ground installations show no power signatures. It appears they simply ran away." The commander almost smiled. Perhaps the stories of human courage were exaggerated. When faced with the reality of the Dominion's power, they had chosen survival over glory. It was a practical choice. "If cowardly, begin standard bombardment procedures," Vextar commanded. "Destroy the colonies. Let the survivors know what happens to worlds that resist the Dominion." The fleet moved into attack formation with practiced efficiency. The larger ships positioned themselves for planetary bombardment while smaller vessels spread out to guard against any surprise attacks. Not that any were expected from such a primitive species, deep in the asteroid field at the edge of the system. Captain Ben Carter watched the alien fleet through his ship's sensors. The Defiant was hidden among the floating rocks, its hull covered in experimental stealth coating that made it nearly invisible to long range detection. Ben was 32 years old with short black hair and steady hands that had never shaken. Even in the worst situations, he had volunteered for this mission, knowing he would never see home again. His crew of 12 had made the same choice, all of them understanding that their sacrifice might be humanity's only hope. The gravitational weapon filled most of the Defiant's cargo bay. It looked more like a scientific instrument than a weapon of war. Arrays of exotic matter generators, gravitational field manipulators, and targeting computers that had pushed human technology to its absolute limits. Dr. Sarah Kim had explained the theory to him before they left Earth. The weapon would create a localized gravitational anomaly, twisting space itself into a destructive force. The target would be torn apart from the inside as artificial gravity ripped it to pieces. The power required was enormous, and the gravitational backlash would destroy the ship firing it. "Captain, they're beginning the bombardment," reported Lieutenant Danny Walsh, the ship's sensor operator. He was young, maybe 25, with nervous energy that he channeled into his work. Through the view screen, Ben watched orange fire bloom across the surface of the abandoned colonies. The Dominion weapons were devastating, turning entire cities to molten glass in seconds. Even knowing the colonies were empty, the sight filled him with cold rage. "Target analysis," he asked. "The flagship is maintaining position at the center of the formation," replied Chief Engineer Maria Santos. She was the oldest member of the crew at 41. A veteran of the merchant fleet who had joined the mission to protect her grandchildren. "Their shields are configured for planetary bombardment, not ship-to-ship combat." Ben nodded. This was exactly what they had hoped for. The Dominion's standard tactics made them predictable. Their overwhelming superiority had made them careless. They weren't expecting an attack from a single small ship. The plan was simple in concept, but required perfect execution. The Defiant would wait until the enemy fleet was fully committed to the bombardment, their attention focused on the planets below. Then they would do close to firing range and unleash the gravitational weapon at the flagship. It was a suicide mission with a low probability of success. The weapon was untested in combat conditions. The ship would have to get dangerously close to such a massive target, and even if everything worked perfectly, the crew would die in the gravitational backlash. But if they could destroy the flagship, it might give the main human fleet a chance in the battle to come. "Weapon status," Ben asked. "Gravitational lance is charged and ready," reported Weapons Officer Tony Rodriguez. He was a calm man in his 30s who had served on military vessels for most of his adult life. "All targeting systems show green. We have one shot, Captain. Navigation. Course plotted and ready for execution," said Navigator Lisa Park. She was the youngest crew member at 23, fresh from the academy but sharp as a laser. "We can reach optimal firing position in 47 seconds once we decloak." Ben looked around at his crew. They were good people, all volunteers who had left families and futures behind for this moment. They deserved to know exactly what they were facing. "Listen up, everyone," he said quietly. "In a few minutes, we're going to decloak and attack the largest military fleet in galactic history. Our chances of survival are effectively zero. If anyone wants to change their mind, now is the time." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They had all made their choice weeks ago. The bombardment continued for another hour as the Dominion fleet systematically destroyed every human structure in the system. Mining platforms, communication arrays, orbital habitats, everything was reduced to debris and radiation. It was a display of power designed to terrify anyone who might witness it. Commander Vextar watched the destruction with satisfaction. The human colonies were primitive compared to Altarian crystal cities, but their destruction sent the same message. This was the price of resistance against the Dominion. "Sir, we're detecting unusual gravitational readings from the asteroid field," reported the science officer. "Probably debris from our bombardment," Vextar replied dismissively. "The gravitational effects of weapons fire often create sensor echoes." "Yes, sir. Shall I investigate further?" "Unnecessary. Continue the bombardment." Aboard the Defiant, Ben Carter made his final preparations. The crew was at battle stations, their faces calm despite the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. The gravitational weapon hummed with barely contained power, exotic matter swirling in containment. Fields that could fail at any moment. Maria, how's our stealth coating holding up? Still invisible to their sensors. Captain? But the moment we fire, they'll know exactly where we are. Tony, weapon status. Ready to fire on your command. Sir. Ben took a deep breath and looked. At the tactical display, the Dominion flagship was perfectly positioned, its massive bulk offering an unmissable target. The other ships were spread out in bombardment formation, their attention focused on the planets below. It was now or never. All hands prepare for combat. This is for Earth, for our families, and for every world these monsters have destroyed. Ben's voice was steady as steel. Disengage stealth systems, all power to engines and weapons. The Defiant dropped its invisibility cloak and leaped forward like a hunting cat. The small ship accelerated toward the enemy fleet at maximum speed, its engines burning bright against the darkness of space. Alarms began screaming aboard Dominion ships as sensors detected the approaching vessel. But by the time they reacted, it was already too late. Weapons range in 10 seconds, called out Tony Rodriguez. Target locked on the flagship's center mass. Added Lisa Park. Ben watched the enemy ships scrambling to respond, their massive forms turning slowly to face this unexpected threat. They were powerful beyond imagination, but they were not fast. Fire, he commanded. The gravitational lance discharged in absolute silence, sending its deadly cargo across the void toward the world breaker. For a moment that seemed to last forever, nothing happened. Then space itself began to twist around the Dominion flagship, and Ben Carter smiled. The gravitational weapon struck the world breaker like an invisible fist of twisted space. For 3 seconds, nothing seemed to happen. The massive flagship continued its bombardment as if nothing had changed. Commander Vexstar was still standing on his bridge, watching the destruction of human colonies below. Then the hull began to buckle. It started small, tiny wrinkles in the dark metal that covered the ship's surface. But the gravitational field was growing stronger, pulling matter in directions that defied all natural laws. Steel that had withstood the explosion of suns began to twist and tear. What is happening? Vexstar roared as his bridge shook violently. The science officer's claws scrambled over his control panel, trying to make sense of the readings. Unknown gravitational anomaly. Sir, it appears to be centered on our ship. Shields to maximum. All weapons, find the source of this attack. But it was already too late. The gravitational field reached critical intensity, and the laws of physics took over. The world breaker's massive bulk, 50 kilometers of advanced technology, and destructive power began to collapse in on itself like a star going supernova in reverse. Bulkheads crumpled like paper. Weapon systems tore free from their mounts. The ship's own artificial gravity generators added to the chaos, creating conflicting forces that ripped the vessel apart from within. Commander Vexstar watched in horror as his bridge collapsed around him. The view screen shattered. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks, and the deck plates beneath his feet began to warp and twist. His last thought was that this was impossible. No primitive species should possess such weapons. The explosion that followed could be seen from 3 star systems away. When the Worldbreaker died, it took nearly 1 million tons of exotic matter with it. The ship's massive reactors overloaded simultaneously, creating a chain reaction that lit up the void like a new star. The blast wave hammered nearby Dominion ships, sending them tumbling through space with damaged hulls and failed systems. Aboard the Defiant, Captain Ben Carter had just enough time to smile before the gravitational backlash reached his ship. The tiny vessel was vaporized instantly, its crew dying before they could feel pain. They had known this would happen, had accepted it as the price of their attack. Their sacrifice had torn the heart out of the Dominion fleet. Commander Zektar found himself in command of a force in chaos. The reptilian officer had been aboard the heavy cruiser Dominator when the flagship exploded. Now he watched in shock as debris from the Worldbreaker rained down on his surviving ships. Status report, he managed to croak, his voice shaking with disbelief. 17 ships destroyed in the explosion, sir. 23 more with major damage. We're detecting massive system failures throughout the fleet. Zektar stared at the empty space where the Worldbreaker had been just moments before. 3 years of victories, 3 years of unstoppable conquest, and now their greatest ship was nothing but expanding gas and twisted metal. How? He whispered. How did they do this? Unknown, sir. Our sensors detected a small ship approaching from the asteroid field, but it was destroyed in the blast. No other enemy vessels in the system. A single ship? One tiny vessel had destroyed the pride of the Dominion fleet. It seemed impossible, but the evidence floated all around them in the form of burning wreckage. Sir, we're detecting multiple hyperspace signatures, reported the sensor operator. Large fleet approaching from the outer system. Zektar's blood turned to ice. The humans were coming. The fleet that dropped out of hyperspace was small compared to the Dominion Armada. Only 47 ships, most of them converted civilian vessels with basic weapons. By any reasonable analysis, they should have been swept aside like insects. But reason had died with the Worldbreaker. Admiral Lisa Brooks stood on the bridge of the Liberty Gulch, watching the enemy fleet struggle to recover from the loss of their flagship. The sight of burning Dominion ships filled her with fierce satisfaction. Ben Carter and his crew had given their lives to make this moment possible. All ships, engage at will, she commanded. Target their command vessels first. Make them pay for every world they've destroyed. The human fleet attacked like a swarm of angry wasps. Their ships were smaller and faster than the Dominion vessels, able to dart between the massive alien hulls with surprising agility. What they lacked in firepower, they made up for in determination and clever tactics. Captain Steve Mitchell led the destroyer squadron in a coordinated strike against the enemy's communication ships. His vessel, the Vigilant, had been a cargo hauler before the war. Now it carried enough missiles to crack a moon. Target the sensor arrays, he ordered his weapons officer. Blind them first, then hit their engines. The Vigilance missiles streaked across space, finding their marks with deadly precision. The Dominion ships were individually more powerful, but their crews had grown complacent after years of easy victories. They weren't prepared for enemies who refused to surrender. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan, now serving as tactical officer aboard the cruiser Defiance, coordinated attacks on the enemy shield generators. Her young face was set in hard lines as she remembered the burning colonies. Concentrated fire on grid reference 777 Alpha, she called out. All ships, focus your targeting. Human weapons, inferior though they were, could penetrate Dominion shields when properly concentrated. The key was working together, something the aliens had never expected from such a primitive species. The battle raged for hours. Across the Kepler 442 system, human ships darted in and out of the Dominion formation, striking at weak points and retreating before the enemy could respond effectively. They used the debris field from the destroyed flagship as cover, hiding among the wreckage like pirates in an asteroid field. Commander Zektar tried desperately to restore order to his fleet, but without the Worldbreaker's command center, coordination between ships was nearly impossible. Individual captains made their own decisions, often contradicting each other and creating gaps in their defenses. All ships fall back to defensive formation, he ordered. Concentrate our firepower. But the humans were already inside their formation, striking at the most vulnerable vessels. A Dominion troop transport exploded as human fighters swarmed over it. A supply ship listing badly as its engines failed. Even their mighty dreadnoughts were taking damage from the relentless attacks. Captain Amy Rodriguez, commanding the frigate Phoenix, led a daring assault on an enemy battlecruiser. Her ship was outgunned 50-1, but she had studied the Dominion's tactical patterns from the refugee data. They always keep their main guns forward, she told her crew. Hit them from behind where the armor's thinner. The Phoenix danced around the massive alien ship like a hummingbird attacking it. Vera Rodriguez's gunners targeted the engine pods with surgical precision, crippling the vessel's ability to maneuver. Without mobility, even the strongest ship became a target. As the battle continued, more Dominion ships began to fall. Their superior technology meant nothing when their crews couldn't use it effectively. The humans fought with the desperation of a species facing extinction, and that desperation gave them strength. Admiral Brooks watched the tactical display with growing amazement. Her small fleet was actually winning against impossible odds. The destruction of the World Breaker had done more than eliminate the enemy flagship. It had shattered the myth of Dominion invincibility. "Ma'am, enemy fleet is beginning to retreat," reported her tactical officer. "Let them go," Brooks replied. "But make sure they remember this day." The surviving Dominion ships limped away from the battlefield, their hulls scarred and their confidence broken. Of the 312 vessels that had entered the system, less than 90 remained in fighting condition. The others were destroyed, crippled, or abandoned by their crews. Commander Zektar sat in his damaged command chair, staring at the tactical reports in disbelief. The humans had done the impossible. They had taken a fleet that should have crushed them and turned it into burning wreckage. "Set course for home," he ordered quietly. "Maximum speed." As the Dominion remnants fled into hyperspace, Admiral Brooks began coordinating rescue operations for the human crews. They had won the battle, but the cost had been high. 14 ships destroyed, over 3,000 lives lost, but they had proven something important to the galaxy. The Cathara Dominion could be beaten. Their reign of terror was over. The age of human expansion was about to begin. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler 442, Captain Amy Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned battleship, Defiant II. The massive ship was twice the size of the original Defiant, armed with the latest human weapons and carrying the hopes of an entire species. Amy was 34 years old, with dark hair and determined, eyes that had seen too much war for someone so young. She had earned her promotion after leading the attack that crippled 3 Dominion battlecruisers during the Great Battle. Now she commanded one of the most powerful ships in human space. Around the Defiant II, nearly 200 human vessels, prepared for the largest military operation in their history. The fleet had grown rapidly as Earth's shipyards worked day and night to build new warships. Every available resource had been poured into the war effort. "Status report," Amy called to her bridge crew. "All ships report ready for hyperspace jump, Captain," replied Commander Frank Davis, her first officer. He was a veteran of the FrontierConflicts.com, under pressure and absolutely loyal to his crew. "Weapons, systems. Gravitational lance is charged and ready. All conventional weapons show green across the board." The gravitational weapon had been refined and mass-produced after the victory at Kepler 442. The new versions were smaller, more efficient, and didn't require the firing ship to be destroyed. Human scientists had turned an experimental suicide weapon into the backbone of their military communication. "We have contact with all task forces, ma'am. Admiral Brooks is standing by." Amy nodded and activated the fleet-wide channel. The face of Admiral Lisa Brooks appeared on screens throughout the human armada. The Admiral looked tired but determined, her blonde hair now showing streaks of gray from the stress of command. "Captains, today we begin the liberation of the outer RIM territories," Brooks announced. "For 3 years, the Cathara Dominion terrorized innocent worlds. They thought no one could stop them. They were wrong." Across the fleet, crews listened to their commander's words. These were volunteers, every one of them. Some sought revenge for destroyed colonies, others fought to protect their families. All of them understood that this war would determine humanity's place in the galaxy. "Our first target is the Vega system," Brooks continued. "Intelligence reports indicate 50 Dominion ships are occupying the former Altarian colonies. They're using the surviving population as slave labor in the mining operations." Amy felt anger burn in her chest. The Altarians had been peaceful people, scientists and engineers who had never harmed anyone. They deserved better than slavery under alien masters. "Remember your training," the Admiral said. "Hit fast, hit hard, and show no mercy to anyone who would enslave innocent beings. Jump in 30 seconds." The channel closed, leaving each captain alone with their thoughts. Amy looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. They were young, most of them, but they had proven themselves in the battles that followed Kepler 442. Human forces had fought a dozen smaller engagements, each one a victory that sent the Dominion reeling. "All hands, prepare for hyperspace," Amy announced. "We're going to war." The stars stretched into lines as 200 human ships leaped across space toward their target. The journey took only minutes, but it felt like hours to the crews waiting for battle. The Vega system was a shadow of its former beauty. The Altarian crystal cities that had once sparkled like jewels were now dark and broken. Massive mining ships stripped or from the planets, while Dominion warships patrolled the space lanes. Enemy fleet detected, reported the sensor officer. 47 ships, mostly heavy cruisers and destroyers. They're moving to intercept. Amy smiled grimly. The Dominion still hadn't learned to fear human ingenuity. They continued to fight the same way they always had, relying on brute force and superior numbers. All ships implement Plan Delta, she ordered. Let's show them what we've learned. The human fleet split into 3 groups, each one attacking from a different direction. The Dominion ships tried to respond, but their commanders were still thinking in terms of traditional fleet combat. They expected human ships to line up and trade shots like naval vessels of old. Instead, the humans swarmed like angry bees. Captain Frank Miller, commanding the destroyer Vengeance, led his squadron in a strike against the enemy's supply ships. These vessels carried the fuel and ammunition that kept the Dominion fleet operational. Destroy them, and the enemy would be stranded. Target their logistics train, he ordered, to cripple their ability to fight. Gravitational lancers fired in coordinated volleys, tearing holes in Dominion hulls with surgical precision. The alien ships were tough, but they weren't designed to withstand weapons that attacked space itself. Meanwhile, Captain Lisa Park, now commanding the cruiser Liberty Bell, targeted the enemy communication ships. She had survived the original Defiant mission by transferring to another vessel just days before the suicide attack. Now she carried the memory of her fallen comrades into every battle. For Ben Carter and his crew, she whispered as her weapons found their mark. The Dominion fleet tried to form a defensive line, but human ships were everywhere at once. They struck from above and below, from the sides and rear, never staying in one place long enough for the enemy to target them effectively. Admiral Brooks coordinated the battle from her flagship, the massive dreadnought Constitution. The ship was armed with enough firepower to level a city, but more importantly, it carried the communication equipment needed to control the complex battle. Task Force Alpha moved to Sector 7. She commanded. Beta Group hit their left flank. Charlie Squadron, protect our supply ships. The battle was a masterpiece of tactical coordination. Human commanders had studied every engagement with the Dominion, learning from each victory and defeat. They knew their enemy's weaknesses now, and they exploited them without mercy. Captain Amy Rodriguez brought the Defiant II into close combat. With a Dominion battle, the alien ship was 3 times her size, but size meant nothing when your enemy could twist space itself. Fire the lance, she ordered. The gravitational weapon struck the enemy ship amidships, tearing through armor that could withstand nuclear explosions. The battle cruiser broke in half, its crew dying before they could even understand what had killed them. One by one, the Dominion ships fell. Their superior technology couldn't save them from weapons that ignored conventional defenses. They're heavy. Armor meant nothing against gravity itself, Commander Velkin. The Dominion Force leader watched his fleet die around him. His species had conquered hundreds of worlds, enslaved countless races, and believed themselves the masters of the galaxy. Now primitive humans were destroying his ships with impossible weapons. Retreat, he ordered, his voice thick with shame. All ships, withdraw immediately. But there was nowhere to run. Human ships were faster now, equipped with improved engines and better tactics. Only 7 Dominion vessels escaped the Vega system, limping home with tales of another impossible defeat. The liberation of Vega was just the beginning. Over the following months, human fleets struck at Dominion strongholds throughout the Outer Rim. Each victory brought more ships to their cause as conquered species rose up against their oppressors. The Xanthari, brilliant strategist, who had been enslaved for 50 years, provided intelligence on Dominion movements. The Veltar contributed their advanced computers to human ship designs. The few surviving Altarians shared their knowledge of gravitational physics, making human weapons even deadlier. What had started as a desperate fight for survival became a crusade of liberation. Humanity didn't just want to defeat the Dominion. They wanted to free every world, every species. Every individual who had suffered under alien tyranny. Supreme Leader Moidoc received the reports of each defeat in his palace on the Dominion homeworld. The ancient reptile had ruled for 2 centuries, expanding his empire across 100 star systems. Now that empire was crumbling as humans carved through it like a hot knife through ice. "How many ships have we lost?" he asked his military advisor. "Over 2/3 of our fleet, Supreme Leader. The humans are advancing on 3 fronts. Our remaining forces are scattered and demoralized." Mordok stared at the tactical display showing human advances. Red arrows pushed deep into Dominion space, liberating world after world. His species had thought themselves the apex predators of the galaxy. They had been wrong. "What do they want?" he wondered aloud. "Everything, my lord. They want to destroy us completely." For the first time in his long life, Mordok felt fear. The humans weren't content with victory. They wanted justice for every world burned, every life lost, every species enslaved. And they had the power to take it. Captain Amy Rodriguez stood on her bridge as the Defiant prepared for the final assault on the Dominion homeworld. Behind her, 1,000 human ships and their alien allies gathered for the last battle of the war. "Signal from Admiral Brooks," reported the communications officer. "The assault begins in 1 hour." Amy nodded and looked out at the stars. Ben Carter and his crew had started this with their sacrifice at Kepler 442. Now humanity would finish it. The Dominion's reign of terror was ending, and a new age of freedom was about to begin. The hunt was almost over.